All right, so like influencer marketing, right? It's everywhere you look these days. But how much do we really know about what goes on behind those perfectly curated posts? What actually makes someone successful in that world?
It's definitely become huge, way beyond just like looking glamorous on social media, and we're talking big money here. This research you sent says it'll be a $24 billion industry by the end of next year.
Wow, $24 billion. Okay, now those sponsored posts are making a lot more sense. This article you sent me, though, it said there's a difference between just creating content and actually being influential. I found that pretty interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good distinction to make. A bunch of followers doesn't make you an influencer. It's about actually having an impact on what your audience does, Like, do they try that new coffee because of you? Or think differently about, I don't know, climate change or something because of what you said?
Right, like I could have 1,000 followers because I post like pictures of my cat. Doesn't mean I'm actually influencing anyone's opinion on, well, anything. Although the cuteness factor, maybe that's influential in itself.
Maybe to a point. But think about, have you ever taken a product recommendation from someone you know online? Maybe they only have a few hundred followers, but they're really into baking or something. That niche expertise, when it feels authentic, it can be super persuasive.
Right.
And that's where these micro-influencers and even nano-influencers are becoming so important.
Okay, hold on. For those of us who aren't marketing gurus, what exactly are micro and nano influencers?
Good question. So basically, micro-influencers usually have followers in the thousands, maybe 10,000 to 100,000. And then nano-influencers, they're even smaller, a few hundred, maybe a few thousand followers. But the thing is, they've built trust with this smaller community.
So it's more about really knowing your audience, really connecting on a deeper level?
Yeah, exactly. And that actually ties into what makes a good influencer, regardless of follower count. This article breaks it down into 7 key qualities, and it might surprise you to see a massive following isn't one of them.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Let's hear about these 7 qualities. What's the first one?
The first one is basically being personable. I mean, think about it. You're more likely to trust someone who's relatable and engaging, right? Someone who feels like a real person.
Right, exactly. It can't just be one-way broadcasting. People want to be part of a conversation. They want to feel like they're hearing from, a friend, even if it's through their phone.
Yes, exactly. And actually, that leads perfectly into the second quality, being aligned with your audience. It's not even just shared interests. It's got to be shared values, too.
Give me an example of what you mean.
Sure. So imagine you've got this brand, right? And they're all about sustainability and ethical consumption, that kind of thing. Would they partner with an influencer who's always showing off extravagant shopping hauls? Probably not.
Yeah, that'd be a little off-brand, wouldn't it?
Right. It just wouldn't feel genuine. And that actually brings us to the third quality, which is being relatable. This goes hand in hand with authenticity,
Yeah.
Just being your real self and connecting with people in a way that feels believable.
So ditch the picture perfect facade and embrace the perfectly imperfect reality.
Exactly. People can spot a fake a mile away, and especially online, people are really looking for that authenticity. If you're promoting a product you clearly don't even use, they'll see right through it.
So it's about building trust, right?
Yeah.
Being real and genuine, both for the influencer and also for the brands they work with.
Exactly. And speaking of building trust, that leads us to the next quality, which is responsiveness.
It's interesting you say that because it really does seem in a way, this all boils down to building relationships, just in the digital world, right?
You got it. It's how do you create that community feeling? Instead of just shouting into the void, Think about some of the influencers you really like to follow. Chances are they're the ones who respond to comments. Maybe they do Q&As, stuff like that.
Totally. It makes a huge difference. I mean, who wants to feel like they're talking to a brick wall?
Exactly. And that actually goes right into the next quality of a successful influencer, which is consistency.
Consistency?
Yeah, consistency. And that's about your content, but it's also about your schedule, how often you're posting.
Okay, so what does consistency really look like when we're talking about, influencers?
Well, think about it like this. When you find a new creator you really like online, what makes you want to keep coming back for more?
That's a good question. For me, I think it's definitely the visuals. If someone's Instagram is really cohesive, really nice to look at, that definitely makes me want to see more.
That's such a good point. It's about building that recognition, right? You see that logo, you know exactly what brand it is.
Exactly.
Influencers can do the same thing with the type of content they put out.
Yeah. The other thing for me is a regular posting schedule. Like if I know someone usually posts on, I don't know, Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'm way more likely to check in on those days.
Yeah.
It's like you kind of look forward to it.
Exactly. That consistency tells people you're reliable, that you're taking this seriously, that you're going to give them something good on a regular basis.
Like any good show, right? You got to keep people coming back for more.
You got it. Now, we can't forget about the more technical side of things, too. This article, it actually mentions that being tech savvy is super important these days, which makes sense because it feels like there's a new platform popping up every 5 minutes.
Oh, tell me about it.
And you got to be able to keep up, right? A good influencer is going to be learning those new platforms. They're going to try out different types of content. Just always be trying to stay ahead of the curve.
It's not even enough to just be like a great photographer or a video editor or whatever. You got to be a tech person too.
Well, think about it. If you're tech savvy, you can use those analytics to really see who's watching your stuff. You can use those tools to schedule posts in advance. You can even use AI to like make your videos better.
Wow, it's a whole production studio these days. But even with all the tech stuff, it still comes down to like good content.
Yeah.
Right. And that's where creativity comes in.
100%. I'd say creativity is like the most important quality. It's so crowded online. You got to do something to stand out, something to really grab people's attention.
Yeah, you always hear that saying, content is king.
Exactly. And the best influencers, they live that. They're always coming up with new ideas, experimenting with different formats. They might even start the next big trend, you know?
It's true. Okay, so just to recap, we've talked about the 7 key qualities here. Being personable, being aligned with your audience, being relatable, being responsive, being consistent, being tech savvy, and then last but definitely not least, being creative.
Yeah, exactly. So those are the big ones, whether you've got 1,000 followers or 10 million. But then there's the question of, okay, how do you actually become an influencer? This article, it actually gives some tips on that too.
So for people out there listening who are thinking like, hey, maybe I could do that. Maybe I could be an influencer. What kind of advice does this article give?
Well, one thing it really emphasizes is don't underestimate the work. It might look glamorous from the outside, but the people who are actually successful, they're treating it like a full-on business.
Which makes sense, right? I mean, you don't just like open up a store and suddenly you're a millionaire. It takes a plan, right? You need a strategy.
100%. The article talks about like, have you really defined your niche? Do you know your audience? And then like, what's your brand? What makes you stand out?
So it's not even enough to just be like, oh, I love makeup or I'm really good at like video games. You got to think bigger picture.
Yeah. What's your thing, you know? And this all goes back to authenticity, which we talked about earlier. If you're not being real, people are going to see right through it.
Because if you don't actually care about the stuff you're promoting, it's going to be obvious.
It's going to show.
Yeah.
And that actually leads to another thing the article talked about, which is engagement. It's not enough to just post and like ghost, you know?
You got to talk to people, respond to their comments.
Yeah. Ask questions, do those live streams, show people you're actually listening. It's about building that back and forth.
Like we were saying before, you're creating a community, not just like a following.
And that takes work. That takes effort. You got to be present. You got to be responsive. Show people that you actually care about who's following you.
And then last but not least, the article talks about picking the right platforms, which seems important.
Huge. It's huge because, you know, what works on TikTok might not work on, I don't know, on LinkedIn.
Totally different vibes.
Right. So the article talks about like, do your research, see where your audience is hanging out online. Think about, you know, what kind of content does best on each platform.
So like a fashion influencer is probably going to be on Instagram, but someone who gives financial advice, maybe they're on LinkedIn or Twitter.
Exactly. Go where the people are. This has been such a great conversation, by the way.
It really has. I feel like, honestly, I have no idea how much went into being an influencer. It's definitely more than like selfies and free stuff.
It's a real job.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's constantly changing, right? Like who even knows what social media is going to look like in 5 years?
Exactly. New platforms popping up all the time. It's exciting though.
It is exciting. Well, on that note, I think we're going to have to leave it there. But for everyone listening, next time you see one of those sponsored posts, remember what we talked about. There's a lot more to it than meets the eye.
A lot more.
This was fun. Until next time.